Well, we're continuing with our series through the Gospel of Luke. Today we're going to be in Luke 22, verses 1 to 30. And we're coming up to the end of Luke. It won't be long now before we're going to be reading about the crucifixion and the resurrection. Today we're going to be looking at the Passover, though. And man, this 30 verses we're looking at, there are so many things I could pull out and talk about. We're going to be talking about the Passover, but we're going to see that in this section there's a plot to stop Jesus, a possession that happens as someone gets possessed by the devil, preparation for the Passover itself. At the Passover, a proclamation that goes out. Then a problem happens as the disciples start arguing about positions and a pecking order, and followed up the whole thing with a promise, right? But I'm not going to go through all of those different things. We'll kind of break it down a little bit. And if you're like, goodness gracious, that was a lot of P's in there. Yes. The only thing missing is pirates. And that would have been cool. I mean, pirates, I've always had a thing for pirates. I mean, after all, they got the patch, the parrot, the peg leg. They pillage and plunder. Last night, two of my daughters were here, and at that point, they were in back just shaking their head. So I'll stop with that. But we're going to start with Luke chapter 22, verse 1. We read this. Now, the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to put him to death, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered into Judas, called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. He went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and sought an opportunity to betray Jesus to them in the absence of the crowd. As we've been reading, Jesus has been in Jerusalem for a few days. He has been going to the temple courts, preaching, teaching, doing miracles, and the crowds in Jerusalem are starting to turn away from the chief priests, the religious leaders, and turn towards Jesus. In Judaism, there were three major holidays that Jewish men who were adults were expected to go to at least one of them every year. Three major holidays. They were supposed to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate at least one of them once a year. Passover was the biggest one. It was a time where Jewish men from all over the Roman Empire would travel just to be a part of the celebration. Many times they would bring their families with them. And with that, the population of Jerusalem would start swelling. So at this time, major event, Jewish families, people from all over the known world showing up there, and they were turning from their religious leaders and instead listening to Jesus. This made the religious leaders furious, and they began to plot against him. Now, Luke starts out and he says that it's the time of the feast of unleavened bread, which is called the Passover. I think if you've been around church for long, you definitely have probably heard about the Passover, but probably most of us don't know what the feast of unleavened bread is. Let me talk about both those here just to kind of get us up to speed with what's going on in this text. The Passover, what was it? Goes all the way back to Exodus 12 and 13. And what you see is the story of the Israelites in slavery in Egypt. Some of you are familiar with the story because maybe you're old enough that you used to watch Charlton Heston with the 10 Commandments. How many of you have seen that? Okay. Yeah, you just dated yourself. How many of you instantly think, the Prince of Egypt? That's what you're, okay, yeah. And that's the younger crowd. Those are all the millennials right there, or Gen Z. And you have these different movies that talk about it, so most people are familiar. But just to recap, 430 years. 430 years. The family of Jacob went to Egypt, fleeing a famine. It was told to Abraham that this would happen to his family. While they were there, it started with a family of 70 people. But over 430 years while they were in Egypt, the family grew and grew and grew into what would become the nation of Israel. A large number of people, a nation. But they were enslaved in Egypt. And basically what we have is the story where God raises up Moses to set the people free. And Moses is supposed to go to Pharaoh and tell them, set my people free, right? But Pharaoh won't do it. Over and over again, we read one of two statements. It either says, and Pharaoh hardened his heart towards God, meaning Pharaoh's not going to listen to what God's saying. He wants to be in charge. But then the statement starts to change throughout the story to say, and now God hardened Pharaoh's heart. It's this dual thing happening. As Pharaoh resists what God is doing, God is basically saying, Pharaoh, I'm going to use you to accomplish my will, whether you want it or not. And so God begins to harden Pharaoh's heart even more. There's a series of plagues that take place in the nation of Egypt. It's important to note that all of the plagues only happen to the Egyptians. They don't happen to the people of God. Only the Egyptians are being judged. They get to the final plague, and it's the plague of the firstborn. God tells Moses to give directions to the Israelites to take a lamb. The lamb needs to be young. It needs to be pure. No broken bones, no defects. And they're to sacrifice the lamb, take the blood of the lamb and paint it on the doorpost of their house. Then they are to take the meat of the lamb and have a feast with their family and with any neighbors who don't have a lamb. They can invite them in and they have a feast inside. And that night in Egypt, the angel of death would pass through. And any house where the blood of the lamb was painted on the doorpost, death would pass by. But to any house that did not obey the Lord in that way, the firstborn of each household would die. Now, that sounds crazy to us, especially in our day and age. I mean, most of us don't butcher animals. Most of us go to the butcher shop or to the grocery store and buy our pre-butchered animals. Or some of you are like, I would never do that. I would never kill an animal that way. That's horrific. I only eat vegetables. That's fine if that's you. You carrot murderer, but you look at it, and it's this thing that even then would sound kind of crazy. Like, wait, what? Death is going to come? And if I just paint the blood of this sacrificial lamb on the doorpost, we won't die? Didn't make sense to them either. But they trusted the word of the Lord. And in faith, they did just that. And on that night, there was weeping and wailing in Egypt as the angel of death passed through. Now, that is how the people of Israel were set free from bondage of slavery. They had no hope of defeating Pharaoh. No hope of defeating Egypt, but it was by the blood of a sacrificial lamb that either life or judgment came, and the Israelites were set free. God told Moses to direct all of the people to remember what he had done for them. And so once a year, on the anniversary of this date, they would have a Passover meal. And the families would gather, and they would do a reenactment of what took place. So that's the Passover. How many of you ever have had the opportunity to do a Passover meal, or what we call today a Seder? Okay, a lot of you. A few years ago at our church, we did one. It just happened where Passover was lining up with Easter a few years ago, and we went to Cutsforth Town Hall. And, Daniel and Tolly, a couple in our church, Daniel's Jewish and teaches Hebrew and stuff. They led us in a Seder and explained the whole process to it. And that was a pretty incredible night as we got to do that. To this day, Jewish families once a year celebrate Passover. And it's a big feast with their families where they remember how God set them free from slavery and brought them into new life by the blood of a sacrificial lamb. Now, with this, Luke also mentions that it's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In the Bible, they are two different feasts, but they're interconnected. Because at the same time of Passover, God told the Israelites, look, you're going to be set free tomorrow, and you're going to be traveling out in the desert. So make bread, but do it quickly. Don't put the leaven in it. Don't put leaven in it. It's going to be unleavened. You're going to make it fast. And as soon as you are set free from slavery, get out. Don't take time to make bread that rises and is golden and beautiful. No, make unleavened bread, get out, go. And what it came to represent, this unleavened bread, is one, a speedy victory and leaving Egypt as fast as possible. But it also, most of the time in the Bible, not every time, but most of the time, unleavened bread represents being sinless. Leaven in bread most of the time represents sin. Unleavened bread represents not having sin. So that's why earlier in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said to the people, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. He's saying the sin of the Pharisees and their followers is hypocrisy. That's the leaven that's in their life. Paul talks about it in 1 Corinthians 2. Not chapter 2, 1 Corinthians also, right? That just reminds me when I was a kid in my mom's kindergarten class. I went to help her in her kindergarten class, and there was a little boy in kindergarten named Timmy, and my mom introduced me to all of her kindergartners and said, this is my son, Timmy, too. And she meant also. But to this day, there's still people that call me Timmy, too, right? And so, just you got to watch the twos there. You look at it, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was celebrated in conjunction with Passover. And on the first day of that feast, the Israelites were commanded, don't do any work, just have a feast. And on the last day, it was several days long, don't do any work, just have a feast and celebrate what the Lord has done. Awesome, beautiful. But here's the interesting thing too. They were commanded days before the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover to go through their houses and make sure there wasn't any leaven anywhere. They would go through all of their cupboards, go through all of the kitchen, look under things, under the beds. They would clean every square inch of their house because they were told, make sure there is not leaven anywhere. There cannot be a single breadcrumb in your entire house. Get rid of it at this time, representing getting rid of all of that sin. Now catch this. The chief priests are concerned because it's the Passover and the Feast of unleavened bread. And they would have been going through their house, through their closets, through their cupboards, trying to get all the leaven out from the inside of their houses. And yet, at the same time, what is going on? They are plotting to kill Jesus. Like, we're going to murder him. We just need to find a way to do it. Because publicly, he's out here all the time. And if he's in the temple courts and we arrest him, the crowd will turn on us. So we need to find a way to secretly do it. And this thing that happens in verse 3, like with Judas Iscariot, literally Satan enters him. John talks about that as well in his gospel. He becomes like possessed, not just by any demon or anything, but it's Satan himself who enters in. We haven't seen Satan since when? The beginning of Jesus' ministry, the temptation in the desert. And the gospel writers say when Satan couldn't tempt Jesus, he went away until a more opportune time. When is that time? Now. And what a scary thing. For the last 3.5 years, Judas Iscariot has been one of the 12. He's heard all of the teaching. He's seen the multitudes come and put their faith in Christ. He was part of Jesus saying to the 12, I'm going to send you out 2 by 2, go with a partner, preach the gospel, I will give you power to heal and authority to cast out demons. And he was able to do that. And yet here, he is not following Christ. He's betraying the Messiah, and Satan has entered into him. The story goes on in verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us that we may eat. And they said to him, Where will you have us prepare it? And he said to them, Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, quote, The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room, furnished. Prepare it there. And they went and found it, just as he had told them. And they prepared the Passover. This is a little bit like the triumphal entry, when he just told the disciples, Go, you're going to find a donkey and take it and say this. This incredible thing, and this looks like it's just prophetic. You're going to go in the city, guys. And when you go in, just look for a man carrying a jar of water. Oh, okay, think about that. Go into Jerusalem, that's already a major city, but now it's swelling in its population because of this big holiday and feast that's taking place. And what you're going to do is just find someone, a man, who's carrying a jar of water. Now, for us, that sounds like needle in a haystack, right? But culturally, the men at this time didn't carry jugs of water. That's what women did. And so this would have stood out right away. They go to this man, they quote Jesus, Hey, the master says, where's my room that I'm going to do this stuff? And he's like, oh, well, just follow me, right? And it all just gets laid out just as Jesus said it would. This place has been prepared by God for this event. Verse 14, and when the hour came, Jesus reclined at table, and the apostles with him. And he said to them, I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said, Take this and divide it among yourselves. For I tell you that from now on I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But behold, the hand of him who betrays me is with me on the table. For the Son of Man goes as it has been determined, but woe to the man by whom he is betrayed." And they began to question one another which of them it could be who was going to do this. Jesus, probably 33 years old at this time, from the time he had been 12 to now, every year going to Jerusalem for feasts, celebrating the Passover every year of his life. And he looks at the disciples and he says to them that he has earnestly desired to eat this Passover meal with them. This is something he's been longing for and waiting for, just to be there with his disciples in this place. And this is the Last Supper. I mean, all the Gospels talk about this. In fact, when you look at the Gospel of John specifically, because he was there sitting right next to Jesus, records all of these chapters of Jesus teaching while they're there at the table. It's something where he's looking at his disciples and he's like, this is what it's all about. I've been longing for this time to have this celebration with you, this Passover meal, remembering what God did by the sacrificial blood of the Lamb when he set his people free from slavery. When you go through this, there's some interesting things because Jesus takes the Passover and he changes it. He changes it into today what we celebrate as communion. As part of the Passover, they followed Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 to 7. And let me explain this and read it. Exodus 6, 6 to 7 says, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and will with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burden of the Egyptians." Now, during the Passover, they would drink 4 different cups of wine. The wine was a reminder and a representation of the blood of that lamb. And each one of the cups lined up with the 4 promises I just read from these 2 first verses. So the first one lines up with, I will bring you out from under the burdens of Egypt. I will bring you out. The second one lines up with, I will deliver you. The third one, I will redeem you. And the fourth one, I will take you to be my people and I will be your God. What we read about in Luke's gospel, no, Luke is incredibly detailed. He's more detailed than the other gospel writers. Why? He's a physician. He's a doctor. He chooses his words very carefully and writes small details that are easily overlooked. Jesus, after dinner, takes a glass of wine, 4 glasses of wine, 2 of them eaten during dinner, the third one, right after you're done with dinner, is the redemption cup. I will redeem you. How did God redeem the Israelites? By the blood of a perfect lamb. So Jesus looks at them and he says, this unleavened bread that represents sinlessness is my body, totally sinless. This redemption cup that represents redemption taking place by putting your faith in the blood of a lamb, this is my blood poured out for you. And on that day, he declared the gospel to the disciples. This is my body given for you. This is my blood poured out for you. And note, Luke, very intentional with his words. This is my body given for you. Not stolen, not taken, an act of his will to give it. Perfect, sinless. Think about that. I mean, John the Baptist, when he was preaching in the wilderness and baptizing people, he's there teaching. Jesus comes walking by and he's like, look, right there, the Lamb of God who will take away the sins of the world. Jesus, when he's arrested, tells them, like, hey, you would have no power over me unless I gave it to you. I mean, think of this. This is the Word of God. This is God in the flesh. With one word, he could have unleashed all of the legions of angels upon them. But he remained silent. Can you imagine all of the armies of heaven? We read in the Old Testament, it only took one angel to wipe out an entire army of people. And can you imagine those angels just biting at the bit? Will he give the word? Will he give the word? And he remained silent because he gave himself to this. This is my blood poured out. Not spilled. Why? A spill is an accident. A spill is an accident. To pour something out is an intentional act. This is who he is. Now, our church, we have a lot of people coming to church now that are new, and people have asked me about communion at our church. We do it every Sunday at the end of our services. I grew up in a church background where we took communion every single Sunday. And I'll just be really honest with you. It didn't mean much to me. I'm saying that, my dad's here. He's like, son, right? Son. Yeah, it didn't mean much to me. I mean, we just kind of went through the motions. It was just kind of what we did. An elder would get up and give what was supposed to be a short communion meditation. And sometimes it was more of a longer devotional, and sometimes a miniature sermon. But we'd go through that process, and then there would be this soft music playing, and the elements would be passed, and it just, as a kid, it didn't click with me, and I didn't understand it, and it was something we just did, sort of a tradition. I even had one friend of mine who went to another church, and he said that one of his friend's moms one time, who was playing the piano during their communion meditation, wanted to see if people were actually paying attention. And she went from playing slowly and softly a hymn, and then worked in bum, 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 bum. Nobody noticed she was playing Mickey Mouse, right? And let's be honest, that's what can happen. We just kind of go through the motions and we don't think about and pay attention to what it is we're doing. But this is what Jesus said, I have been longing to do this with you, disciples. And I want to tell you what this is. And what this, you look to the past with the Exodus and that lamb, that is a foreshadowing of who I am. I am the ultimate lamb, sinless, pure, unbroken, given to you, my shed blood, not to set you free from Pharaoh, but to set you free from sin and death. When we started our church, it was a clean slate, and we were like, well, how often are we going to do communion? And for me at the time, I was like, not every week, because for me, it didn't mean that much when I was younger. So I thought, like, maybe if we space it out, it'll be a little bit more meaningful. So we would do it, tried to play around with it. Do we do it once a month, once a quarter, every fifth Sunday? And we would try it different ways. There was one Sunday early on in our church where we were planning on getting communion. The person that was supposed to do it forgot the crackers. And so I ran to the store and was going to get them and got a wild idea and came back with, what are they called? Goldfish. Yeah, the little cheesy goldfish things. Were you there that Sunday, Jared? The little cheesy goldfish. And I was like, this is going to be great. Like cheesy goldfish for communion. And, I did a whole communion meditation. I mean, do you realize how many miracles are done with fish in the Gospels? Like, I just thought this was this amazing thing. And a lot of our non-Christian people that were there were like, wow, this is really cool. Some of our Christian people were like, wow, that was really deep, a new meaning to this. And some of our recovering Baptists were really mad at me. But, it was just... we tried it different ways. Eventually, when we were at Baker Prairie, we started doing it every Sunday at the end of service, but it was more the type of thing where there were stations in the back and some people would get up and go take it. When COVID shutdown hit and we had to go online, everybody is in their own homes watching online at our church, and people started asking me, like, can we do communion online together? And I was like, no. Because it's supposed to be a gathering of God's people together, taking communion together, remembering this. And that's how it was in the New Testament. They actually did it as a full feast, and we're going to wait until we're back together. Man, the first Sunday we were able to do church down at Canby Grove and be back together. We knew we could have 30 people there. We were hoping for 30. We got like 28, but I'm a pastor, so we rounded up, right? And it was one of those things where it was amazing that Sunday to be able to come together and give each other hugs. I became a hugger at that time, right? And just to be able to worship the Lord and actually together take communion. And over the few years down there, as people started coming and more, we just started hearing more and more people say, like, wow, we get to take communion here? And even up to like this last month with meeting with new people at our church. People saying, can I take communion? People saying, wow, this is incredible. I've never been in a church that does communion every week. We do it because on a weekly basis, we want to be reminded how we are set free from sin and death. It is by the blood of the Lamb. Now, let me just read a few more verses here. A few more verses as this goes on, because this is incredible. Jesus is putting this out there to his disciples. And we look at this. Some of you are like, Tim, just shut up so we can take communion. This is going to be amazing, right? But look at this. Verse 24, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was going to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. For who is the greater, one who reclines at the table or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials, and I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now think about this. Jesus has just changed Passover for them forever. Incredible, beautiful moment. And what are they doing? I'm going to be the first one. No, I'm going to be best. Oh, yeah? Well, you're mama, And they start just bickering back and forth. It's supposed to be this beautiful, holy moment, and their focus isn't even close to where it should be. And what does that mean for us? I don't think at our church, I don't see it where it's people jockeying for position and stuff. I do think can be a problem sometimes with churches in town or in the area competing against each other, and that's not good. But take it this way. This is a holy moment. It is about salvation, the sacrifice of the Lamb, and their focus is entirely not where it should be. Where is your focus when you are here at our church? And I just want to push, it's not everybody. It's not everybody. But I think for a lot of us, it's off. One of my favorite pastors is Alistair Begg. I listen to him all the time. And years and years ago, I heard him preach to his church. And he said to them, you know what the worst time of my entire week is? 10 minutes after I'm done preaching at church. He said, I've spent my week in the Word, studying, praying through it, wanting to come and share the things of God with you and talk about salvation in Jesus Christ. And you all come and the church is growing and people are getting saved. But as soon as church is over, it's like a lot of you didn't even engage or hear a thing. The conversations go to incredibly worldly things. Suddenly, people are complaining about stuff or giving all kinds of suggestions on what we should do better. And that is what's happening in our church. I want to push on that. It concerns me that we can go through an entire service and people miss the entire point. The entire point. Usually well-meaning, but where is your heart and your mind while you are here? While you're here. What's taking place afterwards? This is no joke. At our church, I've had times over the last just few months where I am face-to-face talking with someone about salvation, face-to-face with people who have just lost a loved one and are crying, and other people walk right in between us and strike up a conversation about who knows what. Really? Yes. Brothers and sisters, don't miss these holy moments. What is our conversation? Where is our heart and mind when we are here? Is it focused on the Lord and ministering to each other? Or is it somewhere